A soldier miraculously survived by hiding for 63 days from the German army while they searched for him across the country. World War II, April 9, 1940, Nazi Germany occupied Norway. Hitler launched the Festung Norvegen program. While the Wehrmacht advanced far to the north, Allied forces suffered tremendous losses. In Scotland, in 1943, Norwegian fighters were training in Britain to carry out sabotage missions in Norway. On March 24, Operation Martin, Red, was initiated. 12 Norwegian resistance fighters set off for Norway with a mission to destroy German airfields and military installations. Only one of them managed to survive. An officer from the Navy arrives at the military base, wanting to hear a report from Lieutenant Jan Balsrud. One of the soldiers points behind him. Standing at the edge of the platform is a man with a pained expression, holding a folder containing the report on Operation Martin, Red. As he gazes into the distance, he recalls the recent events he experienced. Surrounded by icy water, burning wreckage from a ship, and bullets flying overhead, the man surfaces from the water and sees his comrade nearby. He pulls his buddy from the water and helps him hide behind a rock. Looking down at his feet, he notices one of his boots is missing. Cautiously peering out, the lieutenant sees other fighters emerging from the water, only to be immediately captured by the Germans. His comrade is also taken, and before he leaves, he tries to mouth a warning that Balsrud has not been seen and must escape. As the Germans search the shore, they find a briefcase. Showing it to the prisoners, the captors demand answers, but the prisoners refuse to speak. Determining that the Germans are momentarily distracted, the lieutenant decides to run. However, he doesn't get far before he's spotted, and the commander orders his men to chase him down. The soldiers rush after him. Realizing he won't escape far, the man hides behind the nearest rock and pulls out a gun covered in ice. Breaking the ice against the rock, he waits for the right moment to shoot several soldiers, then takes off running again. Enraged by the loss of their comrades, the remaining Germans open fire, wounding Jan in his bare foot. Bleeding and leaving a trail in the snow, he manages to throw them off his scent and disappear. Day 1. On the night of March 30th, Balsrud reaches the shore. His bare, injured foot is frostbitten, and despite the pain, he puts on a sock. Suddenly, the sky lights up with bright flashes as the Germans fire flares to locate the fugitive. Seeing that they are almost on top of him, the lieutenant decides to swim across the Arctic waters to the neighboring shore. Upon reaching the other side, the German officer tests the water, finding it just above freezing. However, one of his assistants informs him that the water temperature is below freezing since it's salty, meaning it freezes at a lower temperature. Convinced that the fugitive wouldn't survive in such conditions, the colonel calls off the search. Once on the other shore, completely frozen and injured, Balsrud gathers all his willpower and continues on his way. After a while, he encounters 2 fishermen in a boat. Seeing that they are frightened by his appearance, he reassures them that he means no harm and begs for their help. Letting him into their boat, the locals take Balsrud to their home. There, as he warms himself by the fire, he mentions that he will leave soon to avoid putting them in danger. Looking out the window, the woman sees the flares rising. Turning to the man, she tells him that the Germans are searching for someone on the other shore and expresses her astonishment that he managed to swim across. Noticing his injury, she tells him he has frostbite and offers to bring him warm clothes, socks, and shoes. At that moment, her son enters the house, and the lieutenant, startled, aims his gun at him. Realizing his mistake, he apologizes. After a moment of thought, Balsrud asks how to get to Tromsø. Meanwhile, an officer arrives at the German camp. He is handed a briefcase found on the shore. Opening it, he passes the documents to his subordinate and demands they be translated. Local residents watch from behind a fence. Next, the commander is shown a young man who reported the sabotage group. After handing him a reward, they send him home. Pulling documents from the briefcase, the officer approaches each prisoner to compare their faces. After counting the documents and the men, he asks where the other man has gone. They inform him that the 12th man was driven into the fjord and drowned. However, the officer is dissatisfied with this answer. They were supposed to deliver his body. Vendes tries to justify that the man could not have survived in the icy water. The Sturmbannführer disagrees and orders a search of all the houses, especially those inhabited by medics and nurses. The son of the woman sheltering Balsrud agrees to take him to Tromsø. As they cross the strait, the young man mentions that no one has crossed this strait even in the summer, adding that the city he is heading to is crawling with Germans. But Balsrud wants to try to save his people. In the camp, sitting behind bars, the men discuss what lies ahead. A very young soldier hopes they will be sent to a camp. The others ask him to stop thinking about it and to be quiet. Suddenly, the door opens, and the Germans bring in a bloodied and barely alive fighter. In exchange, they take the young man away. After delivering Balsrud to the shore, the young man points him in the direction of the city and then leaves. Balsrud makes his way to some residential houses, where he meets an elderly woman. She offers to examine his foot before it develops gangrene. After inspecting the wound, she tells him that if the skin starts to turn red, he'll need to go to the hospital. When she asks where he's headed, the woman advises against going to Tromsø, suggesting he should go to Korans to find the Hansens, who are good people. Suddenly, she hears a noise outside. Looking out, she sees approaching Germans and immediately tells the man to run. he manages to rush out and hide behind the nearest snowdrift. After waiting for the Germans to leave, Balsrud sets off again. The Sturmbannführer arrives at the hospital, where he's informed that the briefcase contains important documents. They show him portraits of several people who might know their fugitive. After glancing at the papers, the officer orders them to be found. He then enters a ward where one of his subordinates is torturing a prisoner. Despite the excruciating pain, the man remains silent. Vendes reminds his commander that they are expected to report back. The officer replies that a person can survive in icy water for 20 minutes. They will be hypothermic, but alive. After some thought, the Sturmbannführer decides to conduct a test. One by one, the prisoners are forced into the freezing water, but they don't last long. Realizing that the prisoners are of no use and none of his men are willing to enter the water, he decides to do it himself. However, he cannot endure the 20 minutes. Meanwhile, Balsrud reaches Khurans. Once the family is assured that he is not their enemy, they invite him into their home. There, he learns that all his friends are prisoners. The woman treats his foot wound and shares all the details she knows. In Tromsø, arrests are underway, and the Germans have found their secret documents. She also heard about a man named Sigurd, who was tortured to death, while Erik Reichelt is still alive in the hospital. The others are scheduled for execution today. This news brings Balsrud unbearable pain. The daughter of the family taking him in, wanting to support him, brings him a painting and suggests he stay with them. In the hospital, a nurse informs the prisoner that the Germans have not found the fugitive. The man asks her to tell his wife and daughter about him before he dies. Not wanting to endanger the people who helped him, Balsrud decides that hiding won't allow him to help his country, and he resolves to head to Sweden. Back in the camp, Vendes again reminds the commander that they are expected to report. At that moment, prisoners are being marched past them. The soldiers line them up and execute them. Meanwhile, Balsrud reaches the next house, where a man is already waiting to take him further on a small boat. As they sail, the man gives him clothing and skis, showing him a detour through the mountains to Lyngstad. He tells him about the local Gestapo chief, Sturmbannführer Kurt Stage, who seems to know that Balsrud has survived, and it is said that no one has ever escaped from him. If Balsrud manages to reach Sweden, it will be a personal failure for the German officer. Back in the camp, sitting in his car, Stage decides that the fugitive is indeed dead. He corrects the report to state that all 12 men have been captured, hands over the documents, and orders them to be printed and sent to Berlin and France. Once they reach the shore, the sailors inform Balsrud that they can't get any closer, and he says he'll swim the rest of the way. However, one of the men refuses to let him do that, saying there's no place to dry his clothes, meaning the soldier would freeze. Instead, he jumps into the water and carries the lieutenant on his shoulders to the shore, giving him final instructions. While the Sturmbannführer reports on the destruction of the sabotage group, Balsrud continues his journey on skis through the mountains. On the 7th day, the lieutenant arrives in Lyngstad. As he enters the town, he struggles with his skis and falls right in front of a group of Germans. Unfortunately for him, one of them is Kurt Stage. Surprised by the man's lack of skiing skills, the officer puts the fallen hat back on him. Seeing that he's not being stopped, Balsrud takes off running. Lost in his thoughts and piecing together the facts, Stage suddenly realizes that this was their fugitive. At the same time, Balsrud has already exited the town and is racing up into the mountains. Suddenly, he sees an airplane directly overhead. Realizing it's after him, the lieutenant tries to hide from it, but it opens fire. He manages to dodge the first shots, but then an avalanche catches up to him and sweeps him away. The pilot reports that he pursued Balsrud until the avalanche descended, but then lost track of him. If Balsrud survived, there are only 3 possible paths through the mountains, and he is most likely still alive. Angered, Stage goes to his assistant and learns that the report has already been sent. Regaining consciousness and screaming in pain, the wounded man struggles to free himself from the snowdrift. The Germans arrive at the avalanche site and find his belongings. Exhausted from the cold, pain, and hunger, the man sets off on his journey once again. He begins to hallucinate, seeing himself from the outside. Trudging forward, he falls into an icy stream, but he gathers his strength, stands up, and continues on. His condition worsens. Search parties of Germans arrive at one of the farms and question the locals, but they claim not to have seen anyone. While the man talks with the Germans, he spots a figure in the distance. As soon as the Germans leave, he and a woman rush to help the man. Balsrud, in a state of delirium, enters the first house and frightens a woman with a child by his appearance. Following him, the young man and woman burst in. After assessing him, they immediately provide first aid. In the evening, Hannah is very worried that if the fugitive is discovered, they will be killed, but the others reassure her that everything will be fine. Meanwhile, Kurt Stage receives Balsrud's belongings found at the avalanche site. In a daze, Balsrud remembers his comrades and how they died. Suddenly coming to his senses, he goes into a panic, but the woman calms him down. On the 13th day, April 11th, he regains consciousness once more at the Grunwald farm. The woman informs him that she has washed him and dressed him in the clothes of her brother Marius. Her name is Gudrun. Balsrud learns that he talked a lot in his sleep, which distresses him. What he knows must remain secret, but Gudrun reassures him, saying he spoke of his travels. While they talk, the man hears noises. It's the Germans again. Ordering him not to move or make noise, the woman goes outside. They have decided to conduct another search. The lieutenant buries himself in straw, taking aim at the entrance. As he surveys the area, Kurt heads to the barn. Upon entering, he looks up to the second floor, where Jan is hiding in the straw. Listening closely to the sounds, he accidentally catches his badge, which falls to the ground. Assuming there's no one there, he picks it up, and the entire squad leaves to inspect the next farms. As night falls, Marius decides to ferry the man across the fjord. There's a small house on the other side where it's safe, and they will figure out how to get him to Sweden afterward. Distracting the guards, they manage to bring Balsrud to the designated spot. Leaving him with water, food, and light, the men depart, needing to return before their absence is noticed. For the next few days, the man stays in the small house. With each passing day, his condition worsens. Hallucinations become his constant companions, and his leg causes excruciating pain. Unwrapping the bandage, he sees that the gangrene has spread higher. Desperate to save his leg and knowing that he won't survive otherwise, the lieutenant decides to amputate his damaged toes with a knife. Gritting his teeth against the hellish pain, he performs the operation on himself. On the 26th day, April 24th, Marius and his friends arrive at Balsrud's hideout. He announces that he has found a way to smuggle him into Sweden. Pulling the man outside, they give him warm clothes, food, and prepare sleds. Tying him to the sled, they set off through the mountains. Exhausted and hiding from patrolling planes, they manage to bring Balsrud to the big rock. There, hiding him in a nook under the stone, Marius tells him that people from Mandolin will come for him, and he should respond to the phrase "Hello, gentlemen." Promising to hold on and think about Sweden, the lieutenant is left alone. Kurt and Vendas are driving in a car. The German is outraged that the Norwegians don't like them. Their fugitive has ensured complete success for Operation Martin. Red. Day by day, the locals become bolder, and the last thing the Germans need is to create a new hero. Throughout this monologue, Kurt silently gazes out the window of the moving car. After some time, Balsrud, frozen, still lies under the stone. Suddenly, he notices the northern lights in the sky. Gazing at them, he closes his eyes. Somewhere else, Kurt is also looking up at the northern lights. Marius and Gudrun are at their farm discussing where Balsrud might be, with the man hoping he is already in Sweden. Their conversation is interrupted by an approaching man. He reports that they could not find their gentleman, despite searching day and night. The woman realizes with horror that 4 days have already passed. The newcomer suggests marking the stone at Olme Jarvi, so they can find him. Marius realizes that they were searching in the wrong place. Balsrud is lying in Olme Vagi. The man immediately prepares to go to Balsrud to check if he is alive and to leave a marker. Gudrun wants to go with him, but he convinces her to stay home. Instead of his sister, he takes Agneta, an experienced nurse, with him. After finding a stone and digging through the snow, the man decides that the lieutenant is dead. But suddenly, the lieutenant shows signs of life. After feeding and giving him water, they mark the spot and leave again. When Marius returns home, he tells his sister that Jan is alive and sends her greetings. On the 36th day, May 4th, after lying under the stone for 10 days, people finally arrive from Mandolin to help him. They load him onto a sled and head toward the Swedish border. On the way, Balsrud loses consciousness. When he comes to in a cave, the first thing he asks is where he is. When he hears that he is still not in Sweden and that the men had to turn back, he falls into despair. Nigo explains that they got caught in a snowstorm, but he managed to reach the border and scout a path. If they hadn't turned back, they would all be dead by now. There are Germans everywhere, with their posts positioned in sight of each other, but they will find a way to help him. Seeing that the lieutenant is completely in despair, Nigo takes away his gun. In the following days, Balsrud keeps dreaming about the events that led to all his friends being captured. One day, a doctor comes to check on his leg. Jan shares his story. 12 members of a sabotage group arrived at their designated point. After silencing the ship's engine, they used a map to figure out where to go next. Their mission was to destroy strategic targets, and they had 8 tons of explosives on board. However, they couldn't land where they planned and needed to contact their agent. When they arrived at the agent's house, they learned that he had been killed. As soon as the soldiers left the house, the agent reported them. Once they returned to the ship, they were immediately discovered. Wanting to keep all documents secret, they placed a briefcase with papers next to the explosives and set it on fire. The entire team jumped into the water, but he hesitated for a moment when a rope got caught on his boot. He finally kicked off his shoes and managed to jump into the water just before the ship exploded. Everyone was captured, but he managed to escape. At headquarters, Kurt watches television, where they report on his heroic act of neutralizing the sabotage group. Furious, he storms out into the street. Every day, someone visits Balsrud, bringing him food and water, checking on him to make sure he's okay. One day, the doctor tells Nigo that Balsrud still can't be moved. After a few more days, Jan starts to feel better, and on May 17th, they bring him a small piece of cake to celebrate Norway's Constitution Day. This dessert was made in parts by different people, despite the Germans conducting constant searches. Peering out from the cave entrance, he notices the snow beginning to melt. He asks Nigo how he plans to pull the sled, but the boy replies that he isn't sure if Balsrud is ready for the journey yet. In the city, searches continue. Watching an old man and waiting for the Germans to walk away, Nigo approaches him to ask what they were talking about. The old man explains that the Germans wanted to know when the snow would melt. He told them the honest truth, that only the gods know. Just as the man was about to leave, the old man called out that it was time to move the fugitive because the snow wouldn't last much longer. He also heard that the Bull brothers would be driving reindeer across the border in a couple of days. Nodding goodbye, Nigo leaves. On the 59th day, May 28th, the 17th day of their stay in the cave, Nigo finally finds a way to help Jan cross the border. Meanwhile, Gudrun remembers her scarf. She asks Marius if he has found it in the house. If it's discovered there, she's done for, as her name is stitched on it. The brother and sister immediately head to the house to check. Meanwhile, Nigo and his friend are dragging Balsrud in a sled. Once they reach the top of a hill, he tells Jan that they have a plan and shows him a herd of reindeer. Taking him into his yurt, the herd owner offers him the best reindeer, saying he knows the way well. After some thought, the lieutenant replies that if he gets caught, he would rather die by a Norwegian bullet. Gudrun and Marius arrive at the house. After a thorough search, they find the scarf, but before they can leave, Germans appear to confront them. On the 63rd day, June 1st, Balsrud, tightly tied to the sled and the reindeer, races forward. Germans and their commanders arrive at the hideout where the soldier was concealed. After inspecting the dwelling, they realize that the brother and sister had been hiding the fugitive for a long time. Seeking the truth, Kurt beats Marius, but he remains silent. The herd of reindeer runs past the German border post. Suddenly, he notices that one of the bindings is about to break. He tries to reach it but doesn't make it in time. At full speed, the sled detaches from the animal, and he tumbles through the snow. Seeing that he has been spotted at the post, he exerts all his strength to flip the sled over and get it moving, hiding behind a rock. Realizing he's at the end of his rope, he prepares to shoot himself when, suddenly, a reindeer appears in front of him. Tying the sled to it, he shoots, causing the animal to run. The Germans open fire on him, but none of the bullets hit. At full speed, hardly believing his luck, he crosses the border and finds himself in Sweden. As soon as Balsrud crosses the border, Kurt Stage is immediately informed. Unable to believe his failure, the German steps away from everyone and wades into the water. Marius and Gudrun exchange glances and smile. 3 months later, he hands a report on Operation Martin, Red, to a naval officer. Approaching the young soldiers, Balsrud urges them not to be afraid. They will put an end to this war. Jan Balsrud continued training new recruits until Norway was liberated. The war ended on May 8, 1945. Kurt Stage was convicted of war crimes and executed in 1947. Marius Grunwald married Agnethe Lanes, and they raised 5 children on the Grunwald farm. Gudrun got married 20 years later. For his service, Jan Balsrud was awarded the Street Olav Medal with Oak Leaf and received the honorary title of Member of the Order of the British Empire. He did not consider himself a hero and believed that the true heroes were the people who saved his life. Jan passed away in 1988, and he requested to be buried in the village of Mandalen, among those who had saved him. What do you think allowed Jan Balsrud to survive? His incredible desire to be useful to his country, or the local people who needed a hero to continue fighting against the fascist regime? Share your thoughts in the comments down below, give a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next videos.